We're going to start our little mini fashion show. We want to tell you a little bit of the styles of the day for 1940, and then I'll just make a few announcements after we're done. So to celebrate Bridgewater's birthday, we chose, as Peter has told you, 1939 to 1945, particularly to honor our wonderful veterans in the community. And during this period, during the wartime, a number of changes were going on at home in the communities here in the area, and those changes impacted the fashion of the day. The hardships of World War II at home ruled how people were dressing and created a very utilitarian style. For a number of reasons, because resources were becoming much more limited during wartime. However, having said all of that, we women were still able to look very glamorous with the very limited resources we had. So as early as the 40s, the look in early 1940 was very austere. So you see that skirts went to mid-calf, went from mid-calf, which was in the 30s, right up to just below the knee, and that was to save on the ration fabric, so that they didn't have to produce as much fabric and therefore were able to work on producing other things. The masculine military look started to become adopted by women in their fashions. And you see things like our padded shoulders. You'll see that today. You'll see a very boxy look, a square look, and you'll see some very simple plain necklines. The sleeves were puffed or gathered at the shoulder. You see a lot of that. And the shirt waist became a major staple. So you can see lots of our folks today in costume are in that simple shirt waist. No extravagant use of fabric during that time. The hips were narrow, the skirts were A-line. You don't see the full skirts until after 1945 into the 1950s. And the skirts ended just below the knee, both in dresses and in suits, to make sure the fabric was less used. There was a belted waist. Women started to wear trousers. Now they started to wear trousers for workwear because they started to work in the factories, on the farms, that kind of thing. And in order to do that, they had to wear workwear, and that's where pants started to be introduced by women. And of course, young women with a little bit of more daring, like Katharine Hepburn, started to wear it as daily wear clothing. So you start to see trousers starting to sneak in. Blazers became very common. Women's suit were common. Rayon was just introduced, so rayon was being used a great deal. Silk was not allowed to be used. Silk was needed for parachutes, so you were not allowed to, silk was not available to folks. Bold colors were being used as well. Since we were not able to use very elaborate design, we used color and pattern instead. Evening wear was very influenced by elegant movie stars. So you see evening wear looking like Rita Hayworth, Katharine Hepburn, Barbara Stanwyck, Ginger Rogers, those beautiful long evening gowns with the padded shoulders and the very narrow hips. And they often had those beautiful matching jackets with them, if you remember. Diamonds were hard to resist, but what we did is we wore rhinestones, and of course, lots of pearls. Women always wore gloves. And even by 1942, nylon was needed as well for the war effort. So hosiery nylon hosiery was unavailable. Although we hated the cotton and rayon hosiery, we were forced to wear it. And then you see young women who couldn't get a hold of them to not be able to wear the silk nylons at all. The shoes were block heels, crisscross, peep-toed, sandals, wedges, and of course all the ladies of the day wore red lipstick. Take this off so that I can get closer to me. There we go. Men were wearing suits, ties, and hats. They wore it every day. It was very common. It wasn't just for dress as it is today. The most common hats worn were the fedora and the Homburg. The Homburg was brought from Germany. The fedora was loved by men of that day. And I can remember as a girl, men in my community didn't have a hat on, but they still put their hand up to the tip of the hat. So used to making that gesture to women when they walked by. There were no pleats, no cuffs, no patch pockets, using too much fabric, and the jackets became shorter and the trousers narrower. So we're going to start off with two very lovely young ladies. Grace and Emma are going to come up, take a walk through, and they're going to go around. Is there room for them to come out in the back for you? This is Grace and Emma. Grace and Emma's dad was on our organizing committee and is our photographer for the day. And of course, they have beautiful hats and gloves on that little girls would have worn at that time. Lauren Peters and our beautiful chanteuse, Jean Marshall, are coming out as Rosie the Riveter. Now Rosie, just wait for a second, ladies. Rosie was a cultural icon from the U.S. Everybody's heard of Rosie and seen Rosie's posters. And she represented women who worked in the factories and shipyards during World War II. Rosie was used as a symbol of women's economic power, and she was used to encourage women to work in the factory and work on the farms at a time when it was not necessarily considered appropriate for women to do so. So they tried to make Rosie very glamorous so that you would want to work in those areas. The government told women if they could use an electric mixer, they could learn to operate a drill. Rosie was a contemporary of Veronica Foster, who was Canada's Ronnie the Brain Gun Girl. So that was Rosie was Ronnie. And she was used a great deal in 1941. So you see these ladies are in their practical coveralls. I was told they're not overalls, they're coveralls. And yet were able to look a little bit stylish because they would use a cinched belt, a kerchief on their hair, yes, to tie their hair back, but they made sure it was a little bit more stylish, and of course their red lipstick had to be worn. Thank you, ladies. Joel Cleveland. Come on up, Joel. Don't be shy. Joe is wearing the staple of a young man of the day. Simple dark pants, simple shoes, a white shirt, a very wide tie, and suspenders with his fedora. And this is the fedora. The fedora started in the 1880s, and it was named after a play, a character in a play that Sarah Bernhardt was in. And it started to be adopted by women, believe it or not, and became very popular by Prince Edward of England. He wore it and liked it. The fedora is a little different from the Homburg in that its brim is a little bit narrower. It sometimes was raw edged. It wasn't necessarily edged with a trim or a binding. And its brim was often curled a little bit. The Homburg was a little bit softer, and you do see the Homburg in more of a dress wear, and you saw it at funerals a lot. Dwight D. Eisenhower wore the Homburg in 1953 when he was inaugurated, which shocked people because they always wore a top hat. So he really went out of the game. Thank you, Joel. Jerry Lynn. Jerry Lynn is our waitress today. The waitress uniform of 1940 had the telltale white trimmed collar, the cuff sleeve, an apron, and a beautiful matching hat. The waitress uniform is essentially a maid's uniform, but done in a bright modern color. So this is a maid's uniform of the 1800s, converted later in the century into the 1940s. And you can see that it has the shirtwaist style, and it has the lower skirt length, just below the knee. Waitressing was not a job until the 1900s, when men went on strike, and then they had to hire women, of course, paid them less. When the diner became common, so did the waitress. In England, waitresses were called nippies. I didn't know this, because they could nip around quickly to serve tea at the tea shops. They call them nippies. Jerry Lynn's uniform was converted from a linen and rayon Oscar de la Renta dress that we found in our local shops, and Karen Krause modified it for us. You're going to meet Karen later, and did the beautiful hat. Thank you, Jeremy. Morgan, come on up. This is our student, Morgan Zwicker. He worked very hard this summer at the museum. We've been very fortunate to have great students this year. Morgan's wearing very similar clothes of that area. He has his vest, white tie, black shoes, modified fedora, and he's dressed as a young man would be if he was going to a tea. In 1940s, men's pants were high-waisted. Ties were very, very wide. You wore a bow tie if you were bold. You wore a high V-neck sweater over your shirt, and the shoes were black, brown, or that lovely two-tone. Remember the two-tone? So that's what was worn. And the hair was short on the sides and full on the top. Thank you, Morgan. Jamie? Jamie and Clarissa, come on up. Once young women left school, they moved from bobby socks and skirts and to dresses. And during the war, the most popular dresses I mentioned is the shirtwaist. To combat the darkness of wartime, dresses were in bright colors and patterns, worn with their gloves, jewelry, and stockings. Jamie and Clarissa are wearing the shirtwaist with a puff sleeve, a notch collar, narrow belt, and the A-line skirt below the knee. Clarissa's wearing a black snood on her head, crocheted by her mother for the occasion. The snood was created to hold hair back in a type of bag, and it came from as early as the Middle Ages. They came back in fashion in the 1850s, if you've seen those old 1850 photographs, and then came back in fashion again in the 1940s when women need to get their hair out of the way. And there was a strict ration of material to use, so the snood came in very handy. The snood, the turban, headscarves were all worn during that period. And Clarissa and Jamie both have their classic gloves and the ubiquitous pearls. All right, thank you, ladies. Karen Krause is a volunteer at the museum. She helped do most of the costumes today. She's been in the kitchen all the rest of the day today, and we thank Karen very much for all she's done for us. She's wearing her black flared skirt with a matching black and brick top with a little bit of front ruching, which was typical in the time, black collar, cap sleeves, and the little narrow black belt. She has a beautiful ribbed pancake hat that is original from the period. And she is also topped with her pearl necklace and her earrings and gloves, of course. Thank you, Karen. Beautiful. Sandra? You probably know Sandra Mailman. She's one of her town councilors, and I'm very thrilled that she's a female town councilor. I must say, one of two that we're very fortunate to have. Sandra's wearing a full gray cotton skirt, a white satin blouse with a bow, black elastic belt with patent leather buckle, purple bolero jacket, little jacket, small black felt hat. Isn't that beautiful hat with the feathers? Her pumps have the wooden heel, and you notice that Sandra couldn't afford pantyhose, or couldn't afford nylons, so she had to draw a line up the back of her leg. Just like my mother did.
Show me some leg. Steaming up.
Peter and Virginia. Our last two of the day. Peter, as you know, is the chair of the Bridgewater Museum Commission, is the chairman of the committee that organized this event. And Virginia is on the Friends of DesBrisay Museum Society Board of Directors. She's been in the kitchen all day as well, and as you know, made most of the orchid. Peter's wearing the Royal Canadian Navy officer's dress uniform. You can see that he is not active by, if you're military, you would know this, I didn't, by the arm badges that are not showing. So, arm badges tell you whether a man is in active duty or not. Virginia's wearing a one-piece, beautiful printed navy blue dress with white trim, long sleeves, and pleated skirt. With this, she's wearing her navy hat, white shoes, and beautiful white hat. Lovely. Thank you, you too. Oh. I also just want to say, sorry?
Somebody lose a glass case?
Glass, somebody lose a glass case? Anyway, it's at the front desk if
Somebody
you're
lost
looking
it.
for
It's
it.
out there.
Most of these items all were brought in by volunteers for us. My hat is a beautiful one of two beautiful hats that our curator brought in. They belong to her sister-in-law's aunt, and they are authentic to the period. And boy, are we lucky to see something like that close up, because it's rare that we get a chance to see them. So that's our fashion show for today. Thank you very much.